Hi there, this is Heather of Shutterbug 101. Today we'll be going over the Nikon D5600 and the kit lens, the 18-55. Let's get started. The Nikon D5600 is a 24 megapixel crop sensor DSLR camera with 39 focus points, fully articulating touchscreen, and a continuous drive of 5 frames per second. It shoots 1080p video up to 60 frames, has a microphone port, and built-in Wi-Fi to use with the SnapBridge app. The battery life is estimated at about 970 images per battery charge, and the body weighs just over a pound. This camera is perfect for beginners that want the ability to get different perspectives and be creative with their photography. Today we will be going through the buttons, doors, and menus to help you find your way around this camera. Okay, so getting started here on the Nikon D5600. This camera is excellent in the way that it feels, at least for me. It has that nice grip to it, perfect for beginners. When I did mention that it helps with perspectives and creativity, it does have this nice articulating touchscreen here. So if you wanted to get a like a high view versus a low view, it's easier to do that when you can turn the screen out. But we'll go ahead and get started with the front of the camera here. So this kit lens is a little bit different from any typical lens. It does have a button right here, and notice when you do turn the camera on, it tells you that the lens is retracted, which means it's not going to give you any settings or anything. It's not even going to let you take pictures until you hit this button and you turn it to the right. At that point, it clicks into the 18 spot, and then you can zoom from 18 to 55 accordingly. Now it's giving you your settings and you're able to take pictures. And then when you're ready to put it away, you just hit this button and move it to the L for lock. Okay? And that's just so, you know, the barrel doesn't slide out on its own. It's more compact. Some people get really frustrated with this, but you know, there are a few lenses that have this feature where it does have that sort of locking mechanism. So just know that when you do purchase this camera. Here in the front, we do have a few buttons right on the front of the camera here. This one, of course, is going to be to remove the lens. So if you click and hold and you turn, it's going to be able to come right off. Inside, you can see that we have a mirror here. Now the whole function of that mirror is so when the image is coming through the lens, it reflects on the mirror into the viewfinder so you can see what's going on. When you take the picture, this mirror lifts up, those shutters back there open and reveal your sensor. Okay, and that's what's going to be able to capture your image. It's really important that you don't go digging your fingers in here and poking and prodding and cleaning and taking it to a professional if it needs to be cleaned, because if any of this gets ruined inside, you're not going to be able to take any pictures. You may just ruin your camera. So very important to keep this closed as much as possible. So when changing out lenses, you take it off. Make sure that you line up the white dot to the white dot here. Turn and click, and you're all set. Below that button, below that release button here, this is going to be a shortcut button to control our drive mode. So what this does is, I have the camera on, I'm going to hit this button here. That's going to immediately take me on the back screen here to our drive mode. The S in the square is going to be our single frame, so when I click and hold my shutter button down, it's going to take one picture. If I have it on a continuous low or continuous high mode, if I click and hold the shutter button, it's going to continually take pictures for as long as I hold the button for. The high is going to refer to the 5 frames per second. I believe low is about 2 frames per second. We have our quiet shutter release, which helps the camera be a little bit quieter. It's a little hard to make this camera perfectly silent just because the mirror has to go up to take the picture and it makes a little bit of a clacking sound. So do keep that in mind. You can't go perfectly silent with this camera. And then we have our timer here as well, which is going to hold for 10 seconds. And all that you can control with this button here. We have two other buttons here on the side of the camera. We have our function button, which is programmable. Out of the box, this is going to control our ISO. So when we control our ISO here, we're going to use our dial right up here to be able to adjust that. ISO is going to be image sensitivity. So what I would do is I would just set it to the lowest ISO in the menu, which we'll go over here in a little bit. Give it a sensitivity level. So if it does need to go up in ISO, it can do so in auto. It can do so in auto. So that way it gives you one less thing to worry about. Instead, you can take your time to learn your shutter speeds and apertures, which I'll cover just a little bit here. This button right on top is going to be our flash. So by clicking this button, the flash is automatically going to pop up for us. And if we don't want to use it, we just put it back down. Now, if you are in your green auto mode and the camera determines that you're pointed at a situation where it's a little dark, it's going to pop up all on its own. So you do want to keep that in mind when you're shooting in your auto mode. And we'll go more over these modes here in just a moment. But in case you don't want this automatically popping up, and you still want to kind of automatically determine what to change, I wouldn't necessarily use the no flash auto mode, but I would use your P mode. And we'll go over a little bit more why here in just a moment. So that covers all of the buttons on the front of the camera here. The only other thing on the front of the camera is our little LED light. This is going to be our autofocus assist. So you'll see here when I'm trying to autofocus in a dark area, there we go. So if I try and autofocus in a dark area, this little light will come on to give the camera some assist, where it goes, hey, I can't see in this dark area, or I can't tell if there's a texture there. This light will help the camera be able to see that and focus much quicker. You can turn that on and off in the menu as well. Going to the sides of the camera, we're going to go over our doors here. So this door, it's labeled pretty well. This top function here is going to be for our shutter release. If you wanted to use a remote control shutter to do long exposures, or bulb to capture more controlled long exposures to be for whatever time you would like. We have your mic port here, which is going to give you better audio than what the camera can do, because right here, this is where your mic is. Or I'm sorry. This is where your mic is currently for video. So if you do video on this camera, it's going to pick up sound from everywhere around it. Versus if you use a mic, whether it be a shotgun mic where you're taking it from directly in the front of the camera, or say a lav mic, which you can connect right up to your person. It's going to get you more direct sound than the camera can offer. But if you're just doing like home videos, you know, quick videos to capture a moment, you know, it shouldn't be too bad. And then of course we have our micro USB port here, which is going to allow us to transfer images from camera to the computer or do firmware upgrades. I do find that it's much easier on a Windows computer to transfer through the camera. If you have an Apple, I strongly recommend that you use a card reader, which you can get from any of your local tech stores. It's just going to be easier for the Apple to go through the actual card versus going through the system of the Nikon and then accessing the card. And it does indicate here on the side that this camera has Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, so you can actually transfer images straight from the camera to your cell phone or smart device to share with friends and family. On the other side of the camera here, we have two doors. We have an HDMI door here, which will allow you to connect an HDMI cable, an HDMI mini cable, I believe this is, to your television set, so you can show a slideshow of pictures, show people, like if you want to teach a class on Nikon, you can go through the menus and whatnot, specifically through the TV. We have our card, our card door here. So if you just push, it pops right open. It does indicate here what direction you're going to put the card in, and it is spring-loaded. So make sure that you push down before you pull it out. And then of course the bottom of the camera here, you can see that we have our universal screw mount for tripods, so that should have no problem there on any tripod you have. And then we have our little door here for our battery. Moving to the top of the camera, we've already kind of gone over our pop-up flash. Here we have our hot shoe, which allows you to use a external flash, which is what I always recommend. If you're just starting out with this camera and you take the picture with this flash, you may determine that you absolutely hate using flash, which is the case for a lot of people. And the reason that is because when this flash pops up, it's only one direction. It's pointed right at someone's face or right at the subject. So it tends to overblow facial features, a lot of details. It shows up as a lot of highlights because it's like shining a flashlight in someone's face. So if you're looking for good quality portraits and event photography, I would never use your pop-up flash. I would definitely get an external flash, whether it be Nikon or Godox or ProMaster or whatever you want to do, because it has a tiltable head, it has more adjustments, and you can put a diffuser on it to soften and spread the light. So definitely look into that if you're getting this camera and you're thinking about getting into portrait photography. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and move over to this side of the camera here. This, of course, is our on and off switch. This, of course, right in the middle is going to be our shutter button. If you push halfway down, you'll hear that little beep that indicates that, yep, I'm in focus, and then you can push all the way down to take the picture. Our red button here is going to be our video record button. Now, to record video, there's a little switch here labeled LV. This stands for live view. So if I put it into live view, it's going to give you a live view on the back of your camera. And then you're going to push the red button to start recording, push it again to stop recording. This is also touchscreen, by the way. So it has a few different settings. Right now it's on the setting that if I click to focus, it's going to take a picture. Now notice that you heard two clicks. First it had to put the mirror down, then it had to lift it back up to take the picture, because currently it's lifting up the mirror to show you the live view into the sensor. So shooting on live view mostly on this camera is not something I recommend, only if you're in a tight spot. If you click that button there, it's turning the touchscreen completely off. It's turning the touch to take the picture completely off, but it still allows you to touch to focus where you would like, which is really, really handy in situations where maybe you're in an uncomfortable spot and you need to use your tilting screen to get a different angle and focus on a specific area instead of trying to focus through the viewfinder. So it can be a very helpful tool, just I wouldn't use it in a situation where you're doing anything with motion, so birds, wildlife in general, sports, that sort of thing. That's when you want to look through your viewfinder and not use live mode, of course, unless you're using video. Okay. This button is going to control our brightness and darkness. It's going to be our exposure compensation. So if you were in a situation where you wanted to get a little bit lighter or darker for your picture, this is how you're going to do it. Just to show you a little bit more visually how it does, I'm going to put it back into live view mode. If I access this, oops, it's going to visually show you it getting darker versus it getting lighter. Okay, as you can see, my whole screen is getting darker and lighter because my my camera is metering for it. But essentially 0.0 is going to be what the camera recommends. If you go minus numbers, it's going to make it darker, plus numbers is going to make it brighter. So it's just a nice little control there, and you don't have to have it on live mode. If you've taken the picture and go, oh, I just need a little bit lighter, then you hit this button here. You can see that down here, it's going to highlight it, and then you can go +3, +0.7, or minus, straight from there, and then try taking the picture again. Okay? All right, so on to our mode dial here. So, the auto mode, which I went over just a little bit with the flash. Auto mode, you're giving your camera full control over every aspect of what it's doing. So you're just telling the camera, look, all I'm going to do is push the button here. I'm going to tell you when to take the picture, but figure everything else out for me. Well, this is a great place to start with this camera when getting used to where all the buttons are, getting comfortable taking pictures with it in general. It's not a mode that I would just keep it on because, you know, in situations where maybe you don't want the flash popping up on its own, or the camera is giving recommendations that you don't agree with the photo that you want. At that point, I would switch it into your program mode, which gives you a little bit more control. Not only will the flash not pop up on its own, but it gives you more control over where you want to focus, how you want it to focus, where you want it to take the light from, your exposure compensation, because you can't use this in auto. You know, so it just gives you more control and gives you more ability to learn your shutter speeds and apertures. Going back a step here, scene mode is going to be auto mode as well. It's just going to be very specific. So if we go to our scene mode, and I want to change the scene, so you can do portrait, landscape, child, sports, macro, night portraits, night landscapes. You know, there's a whole bunch of different situations that you can try. Now, I wouldn't let this control your photography. So if, say you are shooting in auto, okay, and you go, oh, but I want it to be more specific. I'm taking a picture of a person. Oh, wait, now I'm taking a picture of a landscape. Oh, now I'm taking a picture of pets. At that point, going through here and trying to change the scene is just going to take too long and you're going to miss your moment. P mode does a fantastic job on determining what the exposure should be, but it gives you more control over it, like I said. Otherwise, we have our S manual mode here, because everything in the bracket here is going to be our manual modes. S mode is going to be our shutter speed mode. This is going to be used for capturing motion or showing motion, while the camera determines how much light is let in through aperture. A is our aperture priority. This is going to control how much light is let in through the lens. Of course, this will be determined upon the lens, what aperture is available. But it's essentially the pupil of your eye. The bigger it is, the more light is let in. And you will need that in dark circumstances. So this would be good for capturing things in low light conditions. But it also gets you that nice blurry background, sharp foreground that you really like with portraits. So as you can see here, my hand is blurry, but my camera is in focus because my hand is in the background. And that's because my camera is at a 2.8 aperture. I personally like this look so I can direct focus to exactly where I want when it comes to my videos. So that's also something that you can achieve in your aperture mode. And then of course your manual mode is going to be full manual. The camera's only doing what you tell it to. It may be a while, if ever, if you find yourself in the manual mode, and that's perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with not being in manual mode, but I do strongly urge that once you get used to this camera on auto, that you put it in your P mode primarily to start learning the different features of this camera. That way you can get your money's worth. We have our effects mode here. Again, very similar to a auto mode. It's essentially auto, but it has filters. So you have like night vision, which is more like black and white, low light, pop, photo illustration, miniature effect. Selective color is probably the only one that I would really play with on this. And that allows you to pick a specific color out of a situation. So for example, if I had my mouse here, right? My mouse is very purple. If I wanted to select just the purple of the mouse and make everything else black and white, you could go into the setting, select it specifically for the purple on the mouse, and it would turn it black and white, everything else black and white for you. So it's kind of a nice little feature to make. It would make a certain subject stand out above the rest. This is really good for example, wedding photography, something like that, where maybe you want to pick out the color of their wedding in her bouquet, something like that. This is also available to do in post-editing when it comes to Photoshop, but if it's something that you'd like to play with, you can always try the effects dial. And then we have auto no flash, which personally, like I said, I would just use P mode because it gives you more options than the no flash anyway. And for the rest of the camera walkthrough, I'm going to stay in the P mode because it's going to show us more options than on auto, because naturally we can change more. And then we're going to go ahead and move to the back. So on the back of the camera here, we have our menu button right up here, which we'll go over last. We have our viewfinder, which of course is going to help us frame the picture through the reflection of the mirror inside to take the picture. This is our diopter. This is found on every camera. If you wear glasses, this may be something that you have to play with. It's essentially like when you go to the eye doctor and they go slide 1, slide 2. Is it blurry or is it clear? You know, so this just helps you be able to adjust the viewfinder so you see clearly for your eyes. So it's going to be different for everybody. Let's see, we have our info button here, which our info button is either going to display our settings on the screen or turn them off. So that's all that is really going to do. We have our auto exposure and auto focus lock. This is going to allow us to lock in a certain exposure from a specific area or lock in our autofocus by hitting this button here and recomposing and taking the picture. We have our playback button, which will allow us to look back at any pictures that we've taken. So far it's just the picture of my mat right now, and if I want to delete this picture, I just hit the trash can button. I hit it again to confirm that I want to delete. Our eye button here, the little cursive eye, this is going to be our quick menu. So our quick menu allows us to essentially change everything on this bottom portion here. So it brings it up in here. We have our quality that we can change, anything from JPEG to RAW and JPEG. We have our bracketing that we can turn on in hard lighting situations. HDR, which is going to be high dynamic range. By the way, I want to shout out to the person who corrected me in a past video when I called it, high definition resolution. My apologies. Sometimes I talk a little bit faster than I can think. But essentially the high dynamic range is going to bring out things in shadows and also bring out things in highlights and kind of even it out for you. It is not available when you shoot in RAW because naturally in RAW you have more control over your shadows and highlights. So that's something to keep in mind. Active D lighting, I would naturally keep that off. White balance, so this is going to determine the temperature of the photo, so more warm, more cool. When you keep it in auto, the camera is really good about determining what is supposed to be the right temperature. So I would keep it in auto. I would keep it in auto most of the time unless you feel like being creative. And then at that point you can switch it to incandescent, fluorescent, direct sunlight, one of those. See how those pictures come out, but always remember to turn it back to auto when you go to a different scene. We have our ISO here, which we went over earlier, which is also controlled by this front function button. We have our picture control here, which allows us to determine the colors, although this I don't believe matters in RAW as well. But you can do standard, neutral, vivid, monochrome, like black and white. When you take the picture in RAW, it just saves it as a color, even if you shoot in black and white. But if, say, you wanted to set it to monochrome, it would actually help you be able to determine values a little bit easier to see if it's going to be a well balance. So that's all up to you. We have your focus mode here, which is how the camera is going to autofocus. So here we have autofocus auto, essentially. We have autofocus single, autofocus continuous, and we have manual focus. So going over these real quick, autofocus single is going to have the camera focus and lock onto a subject. It's going to be for still subjects, like a rock or flowers or something like that. Autofocus continuous is going to let the camera continually autofocus as the subject moves. So this is going to, of course, be used for movement like wildlife, sports, something like that. Autofocus Auto lets the camera determine if the subject is still or moving. And of course you have manual focus, which at that point, if you turn on manual focus, you would dial in your focus with this front ring here on the lens. Let's see, we have your autofocus area mode. So if you want it to be the full 39 points versus 21 points, 9 points, or a single point autofocus, you can determine exactly where you want it to autofocus by itself, if you would like to do that. Your metering, where you would like it to meter. So you can do matrix metering, which is considering lighting for the entire image. You can do center weighted metering, which is going to take whatever's directly in the center, which is actually what my camera is currently on now, because you'll see if I move the camera aside, it gets darker. If I move it in front of the black of the camera, it lightens up. And then, because naturally, if I go to my quick menu here, it's actually going to blow out a lot of these features if I am in the black versus if I have it right over. It's much more clear to read. So determining where you're taking the light from can be very, very important. And of course you have your spot metering, which allows you to pick a certain spot on the screen, use your auto exposure lock, and save that specific lighting situation and then recompose if you wanted to do that. We have our different flash modes, which are only going to be available if you have the flash up. Flash compensation if you need it to be brighter or darker. And then of course your exposure compensation, which is also controlled by this button up here. So these are going to be the main things that you're going to be changing on a regular basis. A lot of them are also included in the menu, so I'll probably skip over those and kind of breeze through the menu a little bit to the most important things. But also on this back screen, as you can see, along with our general settings here that we would be regularly changing, we have how many pictures we have left on the card. We have our drive mode, where we're taking single pictures versus continuous. We have what our shutter speed is, what our aperture is, and what our ISO is. In this situation, of course, what our mode is, the battery level. The battery level, it's saying that our stabilization is on in the lens. That's what covers our general information here. Let's see, we have our directional pad here, which as you've seen me work with through the video, it allows me to change direction on wherever I'm going and confirm with the OK button. The magnifying glasses here is going to allow you to zoom in on pictures in playback mode to make sure if someone's blinking in a group, if it's really in focus, that sort of thing. And we've already gone over the trash can button. So that leaves us going into our menu. So starting up at the top menu on this camera is going to be our playback menu. This is essentially just really going to be features for pictures you've already taken. You can delete pictures, you can, access certain folders if you wanted to, if you wanted the image review to be on, which just means after you take the picture, it's going to display on the back screen here. Auto image rotation, if you wanted to take vertical and horizontal pictures, it would automatically rotate that for you. You could do a slideshow, rate your photos, and this is where you're going to send pictures to your smart device through the SnapBridge app as well, found in your playback menu. The next one here is going to be our shooting menu. Right at the top is going to be where you're going to find to reset your shooting menu. If you decide to play with your menu, your camera's now doing something funny, you don't know who to turn to, just reset to be safe, and it should get you back to regular functions right out of the box. You can rename your storage folders, rename your file names, the image quality, which you can also access through the quick menu, the ISO sensitivity settings. So what I was talking about more at the beginning of the video of controlling your ISO. So you always want the most sensitive portion to be like 100 because that's going to be the sharper image versus the sensitivity of it, the max sensitivity. I would say for this camera, a safe maximum to be in is going to be 3200. This camera has the ability to go all the way up to 25,600. You're not gonna need that for the majority of situations. So having it on 3200, I would say, is going to be a pretty safe bet. Your white balance, which you can also control in your ISO and your quick menu there. Picture controls, quick menu, color space, I would stay in sRGB. Another commenter in one of my other videos asked, you know, you can also put it in Adobe RGB, because if you're working in an Adobe program, you can save it to sRGB at a later date. That's fine, but if you're a beginner with this camera, and you don't know anything about editing, you're not thinking about editing right now, I would just keep it in sRGB. That way it's just better safe than sorry. You have your active de-lighting. Like I said, I would keep that off, along with the high dynamic range. It's something for you to try, very similar to like your effects or scenes, but I wouldn't let that be dependent on your photos. Your release mode, also your drive mode, the long exposure noise reduction. Now for me, I have that off because I'll edit my pictures in Lightroom. If you don't plan on editing your pictures quite yet, you can turn this on so it can do it in camera. It does take a little bit longer to take another picture at that point in low lighting situations, because it has to edit it a little bit for you, but it is an option. A high ISO noise reduction, we'll just keep that normal. Vignette control, that's perfect. Auto distortion control, it's up to you if you want to turn that on or off. For me, I have it on off. I'm not too worried about it. It's mainly thinking distortion when it comes to wide angle lenses, or that sort of bending to buildings when you're taking a picture of say a skyscraper, that sort of thing. Optical vibration reduction, you know, I would definitely have that on unless you're on a tripod. That's when you want to turn that off. That's that stabilization. We have our interval timer, time lapse. Those are going to be just more modes to play with later on, nothing I would worry about now. And then of course you have your video settings if you want to access the quality video, how many frames you would like it to take, that sort of thing there. And we have our custom setting menu here. This is where things get a little bit more buried. So we're going to start up at the top here. And as you notice here, it just goes into the other options here. So starting with the autofocus, nothing I would really worry about here. You have your number of focus points if you'd like to change it from 39 to 11. I'm going to have the 39 on, that way I have more options. Built-in autofocus illuminator, that's that LED light that we were talking about earlier, if you'd like to turn that on or off. Your manual focus ring, you can use that in your autofocus mode if you wish, or you can turn it off. Your exposure control, if you want it to be 1/3 of steps, you can control that as well. ISO display if you want that turned on or off. Shutter release button for auto exposure lock. That way if you wanted to, say, lock in a certain lighting in a certain area with your shutter button, push halfway down and then recompose, you can turn that on or off if you wish. I'm going to turn that on for myself personally because I like that better than the back button. Auto off timers, so essentially if you have this sitting for a little bit, you'll see the screen just turn off. I'm going to put this on a little bit longer, that way, you know, it doesn't time out on me quite as quickly. Your self timer, exposure delay mode, these I wouldn't worry so much about. Date stamps if you want to display the date on each picture. Reverse indicators, flash control, auto bracketing, your function button, so that function button up at the front if you'd like to change that from ISO to anything else. Your auto exposure lock, autofocus lock button here if you want it to be a specific one of those. So say if you wanted your auto exposure lock to be your shutter button, but you want your autofocus lock to be this button, you could do that. Assign touch function, so if you want, so depending on how you wanted, depending on how you wanted the touch function to work, you could change that there. And then reverse dial rotation, I'm not exactly sure for this guy here. If you wanted to change which direction you move that for certain subjects. Then we have our setup menu here. I'm going to start up at the top. There we go. So the very first one up here is going to be format memory card. Okay, so when you format your memory card, you're completely resetting it to how you purchased it. It's permanently deleting any data that is on the card. Now, the reason that this is important instead of just deleting with the trash can is because when you delete pictures with the trash can, it's essentially deleting the visible picture, but it's still storing that data. Now, I have explained this as when you delete pictures with the trash can and that invisible recycling bin gets full, it can cause corruption like a virus. And I had somebody speak up and say, virus, no, that doesn't make any sense. I'm just trying to explain it for people that maybe don't know what corruption is when it comes to their cards. Essentially, if you just delete pictures with the trash can button here, and it has so much data on file that it keeps overwriting by you just taking pictures, it can cause problems. And what corruption does is it actually starts deleting data from the pictures that you're taking. And so you'll see pictures that are only half there, or half of it's blue, or half of it looks fuzzy, like an old television set. Almost. And the reason I say like a virus, I have visually seen on a client's SD card where an image got corrupted and it started eating away at images one by one, like a virus. So it's better safe than sorry. When you format your card, it's permanently deleting any data, giving you a nice fresh start to just every now and then do this. Now, if you're on vacation, you want to make room in your card for more pictures, and you have some blurry ones or some of your feet or the sky, it's totally fine if you want to use the trash can. But after you get back from your vacation, you've stored all of your pictures from the card to your computer, an external hard drive, an online source, whatever it may be. You just make sure they're safe off the card, and you want to start over. That way there's no mistake of, you know, did I already put these on my computer? I don't know. You can format your memory card to be fresh, and you shouldn't have any issues with corruption at that point. You can leave image comments if you would like on each image, which is kind of interesting. You can turn the copyright information on. You can change your time zone and date on this camera, which currently, let's see, right, currently it is correct, so that's good. Want to double check that while I have this up here. You can change your language, so English, Spanish, whatever it may be. If you want that beep when you push your shutter button halfway down, it gives you that beep of confirmation that it is in autofocus. You can turn that on or off. Your touch controls, you can turn on or off. Monitor brightness, you can control. Your info button, if you wanted to change that. Clean image sensor, it essentially just vibrates the sensor a little bit to try and knock any dust off. If you do see black spots on your image, and they don't typically change location, you're gonna have to take it into a camera shop or something like that. Take it to a professional who's going to use this setting here to lock up the mirror for cleaning. That way they can access your sensor. It's a little bit like doing open heart surgery on a camera. Essentially, you don't want to go poking around in there and try cleaning it yourself, because if you do damage that sensor, you're gonna have to buy yourself a new camera. There's no repairing that. So take it to a professional who will clean it properly, and be very careful with your camera. Image dust off, flicker reduction. This is going to be for video in like fluorescent lights. Slot empty, release lock. So here I would have the release locked on this setting here, because if you're anything like me, you forget to put a card back in your camera after you've backed it up to your computer. And if you have this enabled to where you can take pictures without a card, which I've done, I've gone take some pictures and go, oh, how did those come out? And I go and press my playback button and go, sorry, there's no card in here. I didn't save anything. So if you have this locked, it shouldn't take any pictures without a card, and it'll let you know. That way you'll know right away, oh shoot, I have to get a memory card. We have HDMI, remote control if you wanted to use your remote control, location data, airplane mode. This is a good mode to keep it on. If you want to save yourself some battery, if you don't plan on connecting to your smart device anytime soon to send your pictures over. You can also do send to smart device auto, which will automatically update, which is kind of interesting. You have your Wi-Fi, your Bluetooth, conformity marking the firmware version if you want to make sure that's up to date. Otherwise, we have a retouch menu, which will allow you to edit your pictures in camera. Me personally, I would rather edit my pictures on the computer on a much larger screen than this. But if you don't mind, you can do red eye correction, you can straighten it, you can do distortion control, you can crop it, whatever you want to do in retouching after you've taken some pictures. And then the last menu here is going to be recent settings. So things that you may have recently accessed, it's going to show up in your recent settings here. At that point, the only thing I want to cover at this point now to cover, the last thing I want to cover real quick is if you were, say, stuck in your menu, okay? You're in your menu and you're like, hey, I just want to get out of here. I want to take pictures. If you push your shutter button halfway down, it gets you right back into picture taking mode. This is going to be your universal exit button, okay? Other than that, that pretty much sums up the Nikon D5600. If any of you have questions about this camera, please leave me a comment below. If you have any questions about the menu, anything that I didn't specifically go over, or that you want to go over more in detail, or if you would like to see other tips and tricks videos going over specific circumstances or situations, you know, what settings to use, what to bring, let me know in the comments below as well. Until next time, keep your eye out for inspiration, Shutterbugs. Bye.